The cold was a different kind of cruel that winter. It wasn't the brisk, cheerful cold of my youth, the kind that nipped at your cheeks and promised snow days and hot cocoa. No, this was a thin, invasive cold that seeped through the worn fabric of my coat and settled deep in my bones, a constant, unwelcome companion. It had been 6 months since I'd last slept in a bed that was truly mine. 6 months since the echo of a slammed door had marked the final, shattering end of a 34-year marriage. My name is Sophia, and at 59 years old, I had become invisible. It's a strange thing, invisibility. It doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow fade. First, you lose your title. I was no longer Mrs. Mark Renshaw, a name that had felt like a comfortable, if sometimes constricting, garment. Then, you lose your home, the red brick house on Maple Avenue where the scent of baking bread and the faint scuff marks of our children's first steps were etched into the very walls. That house wasn't just wood and plaster, it was a living museum of my life's work, and watching the for sale sign go up felt like a betrayal of my own history. Mark had been my entire world. We met at a university dance, two fumbling kids who thought love was a simple equation. I had dreams back then, of course. I wanted to be a landscape painter, to capture the moody skies of the English countryside on canvas. But then came Mark with his ambitious smile and his plans for a grand life. Then came our son, Leo, and 2 years later, our daughter, Chloe. My canvases were put away, replaced by school projects and pot roast recipes. I never resented it, not truly. I believed I was building something more permanent than a painting. I was building a family, a legacy. The irony is that I was the one who managed the home with the precision of a CEO, yet I knew nothing of our finances. Mark handled all of it. "Don't you worry your pretty head about it, Soph," he'd say, patting my hand. I thought it was a form of love, of protection. I realize now it was a form of control. When he sat me down in our pristine living room, the one with the silk curtains I'd spent a month choosing, his words were clipped and sterile. He said he felt like he'd missed out on his own life. He said he'd met someone younger, someone who didn't remind him of all the years that had passed. He wanted a divorce. The legal proceedings were a blur of jargon and documents I couldn't comprehend. I signed where I was told to sign, trusting that the system, that fairness, would prevail. But fairness is a luxury. The house was in his name. The savings, the investments, all tied up in accounts I had never accessed. I was awarded a pittance, a sum that felt more like a severance package for a long-serving, but ultimately unimportant employee than a division of a life's shared assets. It was gone in 3 months, paying off debts I didn't even know we had. First, I stayed with my friend Carol. She was kind, but her one-bedroom apartment felt smaller every day. I could feel my presence wearing on her, a constant, somber guest in her cheerful, single life. The unspoken pressure mounted until I couldn't bear it anymore. I packed my one suitcase and told her I'd found a place. It was a lie, of course. My new home was a 2008 sedan, parked in the far corner of a supermarket lot. The first night in that car, I cried until I had no tears left, my sobs muffled by the steering wheel. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. During the day, I would spend hours in the public library, not just for the warmth, but for the illusion of normalcy. I'd read novels, losing myself in other people's lives because my own was too painful to inhabit. I became an expert at looking busy, at blending in. I learned which public restrooms were the cleanest, which soup kitchens offered a meal without too many questions. My children, that was a separate, deeper ache. Leo was busy with his own family in another state. Chloe was trying to make it as an actress in a city 3,000 miles away. I'd told them the basics, that Dad and I had split, that I was downsizing. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the whole truth. How could I explain to my successful son that his mother was sleeping in her car? How could I burden my struggling daughter with my own failure? Their sporadic calls became a source of both comfort and agony. I'd sit in the quiet of my car, forcing a brightness into my voice I didn't feel, telling them I was fine, just fine. Every call ended with me hanging up and falling apart. The descent from the car to the shelter was the final surrender. The car broke down, a final, sputtering death that I couldn't afford to fix. I sold it for scrap for a few $100s. That money ran out. I remember standing outside the women's shelter, the paint peeling on the sign, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. This was rock bottom. Inside, it smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. We were a legion of forgotten women, widows, runaways, addicts, and people like me. People who had played by the rules their whole lives, only to find the game was rigged. That winter was the longest of my life. The days were a monotonous cycle of waiting. Waiting for a meal, waiting for a shower, waiting for a sliver of privacy that never came. The cold wasn't just in the air, it was in the weary eyes of the other women, in the harsh fluorescent lights that were never turned off, in the profound loneliness that came from being surrounded by people yet feeling utterly alone. I had lost my name, my home, my family, and now my dignity. I was no longer Sophia Renshaw. I was just a number on a cot, a shadow clinging to the edges of a world that had moved on without me. I often sat on a park bench, nursing a cup of watery coffee from the shelter, watching people walk by, laughing, holding hands, living their lives. I wondered if they saw me at all. I wondered if I even existed anymore. It was on one of those bleak, gray afternoons when hope felt like a distant, foreign concept that my life fractured for a second time. But this time, the light came pouring in. The man approached me cautiously, as one might approach a startled bird. I was on my usual bench in Victoria Park, a small patch of green that offered a brief respite from the concrete and the noise. I was trying to make the lukewarm coffee in my paper cup last as long as possible, the faint warmth a small comfort against the biting wind. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that looked out of place against the backdrop of pigeons and patchy grass. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he carried a leather briefcase that seemed to contain all the world's importance. I instinctively tensed up, assuming he was a park official or a policeman about to tell me I couldn't loiter. I started to gather my meager belongings, a worn book and a plastic bag. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentle, not at all authoritarian. "I'm sorry to bother you." I kept my eyes down, mumbling a reply that was lost to the wind. "Please, just leave me alone," I thought. The daily effort of being invisible was exhausting, and I didn't have the energy for an interaction. He didn't leave. He took a hesitant step closer. "I'm looking for someone," he continued, his tone patient. "It's a bit of a long shot, I know. I'm looking for a woman named Sophia. Sophia Renshaw." My head snapped up. My heart, which I thought had grown sluggish and heavy, gave a painful lurch. Hearing my name, my full name, spoken aloud by a stranger felt like a jolt of electricity. No one had called me Sophia Renshaw in months. In the shelter, I was just Sophia. To the world, I was nothing. How could this immaculate man know my name? My mind raced through panicked possibilities. Was he a debt collector for some long-forgotten bill? Was he from Mark, sent to serve me with some new, cruel legal document? I must have looked terrified because his expression softened with sympathy. He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Please don't be alarmed. I mean you no harm. My name is Arthur Albright. I'm a solicitor. A solicitor. A lawyer." My fear intensified. I don't have any money," I stammered, the words tasting like ash. "Whatever it is, I can't pay." He gave a small, sad smile. "This isn't about you paying for anything, Mrs. Renshaw. Quite the opposite." He paused, his gaze searching my face, taking in the tired lines, the unkempt hair, the desperate hope I was failing to conceal. "Are you Sophia Renshaw? Formerly of 24, Maple Avenue, wife of Mark Renshaw, mother to Leo and Chloe." He knew everything. The details of my former life, spoken so matter-of-factly, were like ghosts summoned in the broad daylight. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. He let out a slow breath, a sigh of what sounded like profound relief. "Thank goodness. I've been searching for you for over 2 months. It hasn't been easy. You've been difficult to locate." Difficult to locate. That was a polite way of saying I had fallen off the face of the earth. He gestured to the empty space on the bench beside me. "May I?" I nodded again, dumbfounded. He sat, placing his briefcase carefully on his lap. He opened it and took out a thick manila folder. The sight of official papers still sent a wave of nausea through me. Mrs. Renshaw, he began, his voice taking on a more formal, yet still kind, tone. I am the executor of the estate of the late Genevieve Du Bois. The name meant nothing to me. Du Bois? I searched the dusty archives of my memory. I'm sorry, I don't know anyone by that name. I didn't expect you would, he said. Genevieve Du Bois was your great-aunt. Your maternal grandmother's younger sister. She emigrated to Canada as a young woman, long before you were born. From what I've gathered, the family lost touch after a disagreement decades ago. A great-aunt. A phantom relative I never knew existed. I was confused. What did this have to do with me? Mr. Albright seemed to read my mind. Genevieve passed away 3 months ago in Montreal at the age of 98. She never married and had no children. She was a very astute businesswoman, it turns out. She built a significant portfolio over her long life. He paused, looking at me directly, his eyes kind but serious. Mrs. Renshaw. Sophia. Genevieve made her last will and testament over 40 years ago. In it, she left her entire estate to the eldest daughter of her niece, Eleanor. That would be your mother. The will stipulated that if your mother was no longer living, the inheritance would pass to her eldest daughter. My mind was struggling to keep up. It felt like I was trying to solve a complex math problem with all the wrong numbers. My mother, Eleanor, had been gone for 10 years. I was her eldest, her only daughter. She left her estate to me? I whispered, the question hanging in the cold air like a puff of steam. Yes, he confirmed. Finding you was the final piece of the puzzle. We had to perform our due diligence, of course. We traced your life from your birth certificate, through your marriage, the sale of your house. And then the trail went cold. It was a private investigator who finally spotted you here, based on an old driver's license photo. The thought of being watched, even with benign intent, was unsettling. But another, larger thought was beginning to dawn, a thought so immense, so impossible, that my mind refused to grasp it. Her estate. I said, my voice trembling. What is it? An old house? A few sentimental items. I was picturing a dusty box of photographs, maybe some old furniture. It would be something. Anything. Mr. Albright looked down at the file, then back at me. He took a deep breath. Sophia, he said, using my first name again, and this time it felt like he was preparing me for a shock. Genevieve Du Bois was an early investor in several technology companies. She lived frugally, but she invested with incredible foresight. Her portfolio, after all taxes and fees, has been fully liquidated. He opened the folder and turned a single page towards me. It was a formal document, a summary of assets. My eyes scanned the text, but they were drawn to a single number at the bottom of the page. A number with so many zeros after it that I couldn't immediately process it. Sophia, Mr. Albright said, his voice a steady anchor in my swirling confusion. You just inherited $47 million. $47 million. The words didn't register. They were just sounds. The number on the page looked like a misprint. It was a figure from a movie, a number that belonged to oil tycoons and shipping magnates, not to a woman who had spent the previous night on a lumpy cot in a room with 30 other souls. I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a high, thin, hysterical sound that drew a few strange looks from passers-by. That's a very cruel joke, Mr. Albright, I said, the laughter turning into a sob. A very, very cruel joke. It's no joke, Sophia, he said, his voice firm but filled with an almost paternal gentleness. It's all real. The money is sitting in a trust account, waiting for you. It's yours. I stared at him, at his earnest, compassionate face. I looked at the official document in his hands. I looked at my own hands, red and chapped from the cold. And for the first time in a very long time, I allowed a tiny, fragile seed of belief to take root in the barren soil of my heart. $47 million. The words echoed in the vast, empty space where my life used to be. A stranger, a ghost from my family's past, had reached across time and death to find me on a park bench. She had found me when I was lost, when I was invisible, and she had given me a future I could not have imagined in my wildest dreams. I looked up at the gray sky, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw a sliver of sunlight break through the clouds. The world after that moment on the park bench felt like a dream I was afraid to wake from. Mr. Albright, bless his patient soul, handled everything with a quiet efficiency that was exactly what I needed. My mind was a whirlwind of disbelief and terror. Terror that it was a mistake. Terror that it would all be taken away as quickly as it had appeared. He drove me from the park not to a bank, but to a quiet, elegant hotel. He checked me in, handing the receptionist a credit card without a second glance. "Get some rest, Sophia," he'd said, handing me a room key. "We'll deal with the paperwork tomorrow. For tonight, just be." The hotel room was my first sanctuary. It had a king-size bed with a mountain of pillows, a bathroom bigger than Carol's entire kitchen, and thick, plush carpets that my bare feet sank into. The first thing I did was turn the lock on the door. The simple, solid click of the bolt sliding into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It meant safety. It meant privacy. I stood in the middle of the room for a long time, just breathing. Then I walked into the bathroom and turned on the shower. The torrent of hot water felt like a baptism. I washed away the grime of the shelter, the scent of poverty, the clinging film of despair. I stood under the spray until the water started to cool, tears mingling with the droplets on my face. They weren't tears of sadness anymore, but of a release so profound it left me weak. That night, I ordered room service. A steak, medium rare, with roasted potatoes and asparagus. Food I hadn't even allowed myself to dream of. When it arrived, I ate slowly, savoring every single bite. It was more than just a meal. It was a reclamation. I was no longer a person subsisting on charity and leftovers. I was a person who could choose. The simple act of choosing what to eat felt like an incredible power. I slept for 12 straight hours, a deep, dreamless sleep, wrapped in high thread count sheets that felt like a cocoon. The next few days were a blur of legalities. Mr. Albright guided me through the process of opening bank accounts, of signing documents that transferred the colossal sum into my name. Seeing the balance on a bank statement didn't make it feel any more real. It was an abstract concept, a number on a screen. The reality of it came in small, jarring moments. I bought a new coat, a warm, wool cashmere blend that felt like a shield against the world. At the checkout, the cashier told me the price, and I felt the familiar jolt of panic, the mental calculation of whether I could afford it. Then I remembered. I could afford 1,000 of them. I paid with a new debit card, my hand shaking slightly. My first real decision was to find a place to live. Not a mansion, not a palace. I craved simplicity, quiet, and security. I found a small, furnished apartment for rent in a respectable but unassuming building with a doorman. The day I moved in, with 2 new suitcases filled with clothes I'd bought myself, I felt a sense of ownership I hadn't even felt in the house on Maple Avenue. That house had been Mark's vision. This small, clean, light-filled space was mine. Then came the difficult part, telling my children. I called Leo first. His initial reaction was stunned silence, followed by a torrent of questions. Was I okay? Was I sure? Was this real? And then, beneath the shock, I heard the relief in his voice. The relief of a son who had been worried sick, but didn't know how to help. He confessed that he and his wife had been losing sleep, that he'd felt a terrible guilt for not being able to do more. Chloe's reaction was different. She cried. She cried for what I had been through, and she cried with joy. "Mom, you can come here," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You can get a beautiful apartment. We can see each other every day." The distance I had created out of shame began to dissolve. The money, it turned out, wasn't a barrier. It was a bridge. It gave them permission to stop worrying and gave me permission to be looked after, just for a little while. Of course, the news traveled. It wasn't long before my phone, a new one with a new number that only a few people had, rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered hesitantly. "Soph? Is that you?" The voice was instantly recognizable. It was Mark. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. I hadn't spoken to him since the day I'd left our old house with my 1 suitcase. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, my voice devoid of the warmth it had once held for him. I heard. I heard some crazy news, he stammered. Is it true? About some inheritance. My life is no longer your concern, I said, amazed at the strength in my own voice. Soph, listen, he said, his tone shifting, becoming slick, familiar. It was the voice he used when he wanted something. I've been thinking a lot. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. The woman, it's over. It was nothing. It was you, sophomore. It was always you. The words that once would have made my heart sing now sounded hollow, pathetic. He didn't miss me. He missed the life he thought I could now give him. He saw a lottery ticket, not a person. I was homeless, Mark, I said, the words falling like stones into the silence between us. For 6 months, I was destitute. I slept in my car until it died. I slept in a shelter. Did you ever wonder where I was? Did you ever once try to find out if I was even alive? A choked silence on the other end of the line. He had no answer. He had never even thought to ask. Don't call me again, I said, and with a steadiness I didn't know I possessed, I ended the call. I blocked his number. It wasn't an act of anger, but of preservation. I was closing a door, not slamming it. I was choosing peace. The true healing, however, didn't come from the money or the new apartment. It came from a trip I took to Montreal. Mr. Albright had given me the key to Genevieve Dubois's small apartment, which had been preserved as she left it. I needed to know the woman who had changed my life. Her apartment was modest, filled with books, art, and stacks of journals. I spent a week there, reading her life story, written in a neat, elegant script. Genevieve had been a rebel. She had defied her family to move to a new country alone. She had loved and lost. She had faced sexism in the business world and had beaten men at their own game, quietly, cleverly. She never sought the limelight. She sought freedom. In one of her last entries, she wrote about her estranged family. I hear my niece Eleanor's girl, Sophia, is a good woman, she had written. A wife and a mother. I hope she has a little of my fire in her. I hope she never lets anyone extinguish her light. I've made provisions, just in case. A woman must always have her own provisions. I sat in her armchair, her journal in my lap, and wept. This woman I'd never met had seen me. She had understood a part of me I hadn't even understood myself. She hadn't just left me money, she had left me a legacy of strength, a blueprint for a life lived on one's own terms. The money was not a happy ending. It was a beginning. It was a tool. The trauma of those homeless months didn't just vanish. I would sometimes wake up in my soft, comfortable bed with a jolt of panic, my heart pounding, thinking I was back in the shelter. I was frugal to a fault, terrified of the money disappearing. But with therapy and with time, I began to see it differently. I knew I couldn't just sit on this fortune. It felt wrong. It felt like a betrayal of Genevieve's foresight and my own suffering. My purpose became clear to me one afternoon as I walked past that same park, that same bench. I saw a woman sitting there, her face etched with a familiar weariness, nursing a cup of coffee just as I had done. And I knew what I had to do. I started a foundation, the Genevieve Dubois Foundation. Its mission is simple, to provide safe housing and support services for women over 50 who find themselves displaced for any reason. Divorce, widowhood, financial ruin. We bought a beautiful old building, not a sterile institution, but a warm, welcoming home. We call it the Sophia House. It's filled with comfortable furniture, a library of books, art supplies, and gardens. We offer financial literacy classes, legal aid, therapy, and job training. We help women get back on their feet, not with a handout, but with a hand up. I'm there most days. I don't run it from a distance. I sit with the women, I listen to their stories, I hold their hands. I tell them mine. I tell them that invisibility is a lie. I tell them that their worth was never in their homes, or their husbands, or their bank accounts. It has always been within them. My life now is richer than I could ever have imagined, and not because of the millions in the bank. It's rich with purpose. It's rich with connection. My children visit often, proud of the work I'm doing. We have the kind of honest, open relationship I always dreamed of. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in my quiet apartment, looking out at the city lights, and I think about my journey. The pain was real. The loss was profound. I would not wish it on anyone. But it taught me something essential. It taught me that you can lose everything you think defines you, and yet, the core of who you are remains. Resilience. Kindness. And a fire that, even when it's down to a single ember, can be coaxed back into a brilliant flame. My name is Sophia, and I am no longer invisible. I am seen. And more importantly, I have finally learned how to see myself. It's a peculiar truth that great trauma leaves behind ghosts. They don't rattle chains or whisper in the dead of night. They are quieter, more insidious. They are the phantom chill of a park bench on a warm day, the reflexive flinch when a price tag seems too high, the sudden, heart-stopping fear in the middle of the night that the silk sheets are a dream and the lumpy shelter cot is reality. The money had built me a new life, a fortress of security and comfort, but it couldn't entirely exorcise the ghosts of the woman I had been. For a long time, I think I was afraid to be truly happy, as if joy was a fragile vase that would shatter the moment I held it too tightly. The Sophia house was my penance and my salvation, a place where I could confront those ghosts every single day, not just my own, but the ones that haunted the eyes of every woman who walked through our doors. My days settled into a rhythm that was both demanding and deeply fulfilling. Mornings were for administration, the endless but necessary paperwork that kept the foundation running. But the afternoons belonged to the women. I made a point of being there for every new arrival. I wanted to be the first face they saw, a face that wasn't filled with pity or judgment, but with a quiet understanding. I remembered the shame of that first day at the shelter, the feeling of being processed like a piece of inventory. I vowed no woman would ever feel that way here. One Tuesday, a woman named Eleanor arrived. The name itself sent a gentle tremor through me, the same name as my mother. This Eleanor was small and bird-like, with hands that twisted a worn handkerchief relentlessly. She was 62, a recent widow. Her husband had handled all their finances, and upon his death, she discovered a mountain of secret debt. The bank had taken the house, the car, everything. Her story was a chilling echo of my own, a testament to how easily a woman of our generation could be rendered helpless by the very structures we were taught to trust. She wouldn't make eye contact. She spoke in a whisper, answering our intake coordinator's gentle questions with single, brittle words. When the formalities were done, I asked Eleanor if she would join me for a cup of tea in the garden. She looked surprised, as if she expected to be shown to a room and forgotten. We sat in the sunshine, amidst the lavender and climbing roses, the scent of the earth a comforting balm. For a long time, we said nothing. I just let her be. I let her feel the warmth of the sun and listen to the birds. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "It's so beautiful here," she whispered, her eyes fixed on a vibrant patch of bluebells. I feel like I don't belong." "I know the feeling," I said softly. She looked at me then, truly looked at me, with eyes filled with a weary bewilderment. In my tailored trousers and silk blouse, I suppose I looked like a woman who had never known a moment of hardship. A little over a year ago, I began, my voice steady. I was sleeping on a bench in Victoria Park. Right over there. I pointed vaguely in the direction of the city. I used to drink watery coffee from a shelter and pray that no one would see me. I felt like the whole world had forgotten I existed. I felt I deserved to be forgotten. Eleanor's hands stopped twisting the handkerchief. Her gaze was locked on mine, her disbelief slowly melting into a dawning recognition. I told her everything. I told her about Mark, about the car, about the shame, about the cold that lived in your bones. I didn't tell her about the $47 million. That wasn't the important part of the story. The important part was the fall. The important part was the invisibility. When I finished, a single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. "I thought I was the only one," she said, a universe of loneliness contained in that simple phrase. "I thought I was so stupid." "You weren't stupid, Eleanor," I said, reaching across the small table and placing my hand over hers. "You were trusting. There's a difference. We were taught to trust. The world is what failed us, not the other way around." That conversation was a turning point, not just for Eleanor, but for me. I realized that my story, the unvarnished, painful truth of it, was the most valuable asset I possessed. It was a key that could unlock the prison of shame these women had built around themselves. From that day on, sharing my past became a central part of the healing process at the Sophia house. It was the common ground on which we could all stand together. With the foundation running smoothly under a capable director I'd hired, I found myself with something I hadn't had in 35 years, time. Empty stretches of it that felt both luxurious and unnerving. One day, clearing out a small storage room to create a new reading nook for the house, I came across a box I'd sent for from my old life, filled with odds and ends the movers had packed. At the bottom, under old photo albums and Chloe's kindergarten drawings, were my canvases and paints. They were untouched, preserved in time. The tubes of oil paint were hardened, the brushes stiff, the canvases yellowed with age. I ran my hand over the rough fabric of a blank canvas, and a feeling I couldn't name washed over me. It was grief, but also a flicker of something else. A ghost of a girl who dreamed of painting English skies. On impulse, I went out and bought all new supplies. The best of everything. I converted a spare bedroom in my apartment, a room with perfect northern light, into a studio. The first time I squeezed a dollop of ultramarine blue onto the palette, the sharp, familiar scent of the linseed oil filled the air, and I was transported. I was 20 years old again, full of a fierce, untamed ambition. My first few attempts were a disaster. My hands felt clumsy, my eyes uncertain. The images in my head refused to translate onto the canvas. I felt a surge of frustration, the old critic in my head whispering that it was too late, that the talent had withered and died. But then I remembered Genevieve's journals. A woman must always have her own provisions. This was a provision for my soul. I wasn't painting for a gallery or for acclaim. I was painting for that girl whose dreams had been packed away in a box. I kept at it day after day. I painted the view from my window, the flowers in the garden at Sophia House, the face of Eleanor, now filled with a budding confidence. The paintings weren't masterpieces, but they were mine. They were honest. It was the garden that brought Daniel into my life. I wanted to expand it, to create a larger therapeutic space with a vegetable patch and a proper greenhouse. Mr. Albright, who had become a dear friend and a board member for the foundation, recommended a landscape architect. Daniel was in his early 60s, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and hands that were permanently stained with soil. He had a quiet, calming presence. He didn't talk about money or status. He talked about the language of plants, about how a garden was a story of patience and renewal. He listened, truly listened, to my vision for the space. He saw it not as a project, but as a sanctuary. We spent hours walking the grounds, our conversations meandering from the best soil for growing tomatoes to the books we were reading. He spoke of his late wife, a botanist, with a love that was still palpable, but it was a gentle memory, not a raw wound. I found myself telling him about my painting, something I hadn't shared with many people. "I'd love to see them sometime," he said, his smile genuine. There was no pretense in him. My daughter Chloe came to visit that autumn. She walked into my apartment, and the first thing she saw was the studio, canvases leaning against every wall. She stopped, her eyes wide. "Mom," she breathed, walking slowly into the room. "You're painting again." She moved from one canvas to another, her expression unreadable. I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach, the old fear of not being good enough. She stopped in front of the portrait I'd done of Eleanor. In the painting, Eleanor was smiling, a real, unguarded smile, her hands resting on a potted geranium. This is who you are," Chloe said, turning to me, her eyes shining with tears. "This is you. Not just the woman who raised us, not just Dad's wife. This is the you I never got to know." She threw her arms around me, holding me tight. "I'm so proud of you, Mom. Not for the money. For this. For finding your way back to yourself." In that moment, I felt a wholeness I had never known. The fragmented pieces of my life, the young artist, the devoted mother, the broken woman, the philanthropist, were finally coming together, creating a picture that was complex and scarred, but beautiful and complete. The final ghost was exorcised on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. I was in a small, independent bookstore near my apartment, browsing the art section. The bell above the door chimed, and I glanced up distractedly. And there he was. Mark. He looked diminished. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a weary slump in his shoulders. His expensive suit looked a size too big. His face was sallow and lined with a stress that hadn't been there before. He was with the other woman. She was younger, yes, but she had a hard, discontented look about her. They were arguing in hushed, angry tones. He saw me at the same moment. His eyes widened, and a complex series of emotions flickered across his face: shock, shame, and then a flicker of the old, calculating opportunism. He started to take a step towards me, a desperate hope in his eyes. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I didn't feel the old, familiar pang of hurt or the hot flush of anger. I felt a vast, calm, and profound pity. I saw a man who had thrown away a lifetime of shared history for a fleeting illusion and was now trapped in the hollow reality he had created. I simply met his gaze, gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement, the kind one gives a stranger you pass on the street, and then I turned back to my book. I heard him stop, falter, and then his companion pulled him away, and they left the store. I stood there for a long moment, the scent of old paper and rain filling my senses. The knot of pain I had carried in my chest for so long, the one I thought would be there forever, was gone. It hadn't been severed in a dramatic confrontation. It had simply dissolved. He had no power over me anymore. He was just a character in a book I had already finished reading. A few weeks later, Daniel helped me and some of the women from the house plant the first seedlings in our new vegetable garden. Eleanor, who now ran the foundation's peer support group, was laughing as she showed another woman how to properly space carrot seeds. I had set up my easel at the edge of the garden, trying to capture the new life bursting from the dark, rich soil. Daniel came and stood beside me, watching me mix a vibrant green on my palette. "It's a beautiful thing you've built here, Sophia," he said quietly. "Not just the garden. All of it." "Genevieve built it," I said, dabbing the green onto the canvas. "I'm just the caretaker." He smiled. "I think she'd be very happy with the caretaker she chose." I looked out at the scene before me, the women, their faces full of hope and concentration, working together. The beautiful, safe home standing behind them. The sun warming my face. The comfortable silence of a new friend by my side. The painting on my easel, a testament to a reclaimed dream. The $47 million had saved my life, of that there was no doubt. But it wasn't the money that had healed me. It was the love of a daughter who saw me for who I truly was. It was the shared tears with a woman named Eleanor. It was the scent of oil paints and fresh earth. It was the quiet closure of seeing a past that no longer hurt. The inheritance was the key, but I was the one who had to be brave enough to turn it, to open the door, and to walk through it into the brilliant, terrifying, and beautiful light of my own unwritten future. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what the next chapter might hold. I was ready to paint it myself. The passage of time is a gentle artist. It doesn't erase the scars. It softens their edges, blending them into the larger portrait of a life. The years that followed my return from the brink were not a whirlwind of lavish parties or extravagant trips around the globe, as one might imagine. The truth is, I had no interest in that life. I had learned, in the harshest way possible, that the value of a day is not measured in what you can buy, but in the peace you can find. My wealth was a silent partner, a background hum that afforded me the greatest luxury of all, the freedom to build a life of quiet purpose. The garden at the Sophia house flourished, and so did my friendship with Daniel. It was a companionship that grew as slowly and as naturally as the oak tree we planted in the center of the lawn. There were no grand romantic gestures, no breathless declarations. There was something far more precious, a shared understanding. We would spend hours together, often in comfortable silence, pruning the roses or weeding the vegetable beds. He understood my need for solitude, my lingering fear of being consumed by another's world. He had his own life, his own work, his own memories. When we were together, we were two complete people choosing to share a space, not two halves trying to make a whole. He loved my art, not because it was technically brilliant, but because he said he could see my soul in the brushstrokes. He saw the melancholy in my stormy skies and the stubborn hope in my rendering of a single, resilient wildflower. The Sophia house became a beacon. We helped hundreds of women. We watched them arrive, broken and hollow-eyed, and we watched them leave, sometimes months, sometimes years later, with their shoulders back and a light of self-worth in their eyes. Eleanor became my right hand, a pillar of strength and empathy for every new resident. Her transformation was my constant reminder of what was possible. She had reclaimed her life with a ferocity and grace that humbled me. We established programs that went beyond mere housing. We had mentorships where women who had successfully transitioned would guide the newcomers. We had a community kitchen project that sold jams and baked goods at local markets, providing a small income and a large dose of pride. We were a family, forged not by blood, but by the shared experience of being lost and found. One afternoon, Chloe called me, her voice buzzing with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. She had landed a significant role in a well-regarded independent film. "They're shooting for a week in the city, Mom. I can stay with you." The joy in her voice was my joy. When she arrived, she was different. The desperate hunger for success had been replaced by a quiet confidence. She looked at my life, at the foundation, at my studio filled with canvases, and I think she finally understood that my happiness was no longer dependent on anyone else. She was the one who pushed me. "Mom, you have to show these," she said, gesturing around my studio one evening. "This isn't just a hobby. This is a story. People need to see this." The idea terrified me. My painting was my private sanctuary, the one place I was truly myself, without expectation or judgment. To put it on public display felt like standing naked in the middle of Victoria Park all over again. "It's too personal," I argued. "Who would even care?" "I care," she said simply. "Daniel cares. Eleanor cares. Every woman whose life you've touched would care. It's not about selling them, Mom. It's about sharing them. It's about showing people that it's never too late to pick up the brush." And so, with a great deal of trepidation, I agreed. We didn't rent a fancy downtown gallery. We cleared out the large common room at the Sophia house. Daniel and Leo, who flew in for the occasion, helped me hang the paintings. We sent out simple invitations. It was to be a fundraiser, with all proceeds going directly to the Foundation's expansion fund. The night of the exhibition, the room was filled with light and laughter. It was a strange and wonderful mix of people. The women from the house, my children, Daniel, Mr. Albright and his wife, neighbors, local shop owners, even the mayor. I stood in a corner, my heart hammering, watching people look at my work. I watched them look at the moody landscapes of my early days of healing, the somber portraits, and the more recent, vibrant paintings of the garden in full bloom. It was the entire arc of my rebirth, hanging on the walls for all to see. Leo stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders. "She would be so proud of you," he said softly. I knew he didn't mean our mother, Eleanor. He meant Genevieve. He understood. My son, the busy executive, had a depth of empathy I had never given him credit for. In that moment, I realized the inheritance had healed my family in ways I never expected. It had lifted the burden of worry from my children and allowed us to meet as equals, as adults bound by love, not by need or guilt. Then I saw her. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, was standing in front of a small painting I had done of the park bench. My bench. In the painting, it was empty, bathed in a cold, blue winter light, a single, fallen leaf on the seat. It wasn't a hopeful painting. It was a painting about memory and absence. The young woman was crying, silent tears running down her cheeks. She was a resident at one of the city's youth shelters, a place we had recently started supporting. I walked over to her slowly. "Are you all right?" I asked gently. She wiped her eyes, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's just that bench. I know that bench. I know that feeling. I didn't know anyone else did." I looked at my painting and then at this young, fragile girl, and the final piece of my own story clicked into place. My pain had not been a punishment. It had been a lesson. A lesson in a language that every person who has ever felt alone can understand. It was a bridge. I know it too, I said. My name is Sophia. We talked for a long time. I didn't tell her the details of my fortune, but I told her about the cold, and the fear, and the feeling of being invisible. Later that evening, she came to find me. She was holding a crumpled envelope. "It's not much," she said, her cheeks flushed. "It's all I have, but I want to buy it. The painting of the bench, to remind myself how far I've come." My eyes filled with tears. I took the envelope and pressed it back into her hand. "No," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's a gift. From one survivor to another. You just hang it somewhere you can see it every day. And you remember that even after the coldest winter, the sun will always, always rise again." The evening wound down. People left, their hearts and minds a little fuller. We had raised more money than I could have hoped for. But that wasn't the victory. The victory was in that one small exchange. The true fortune wasn't the $47 million. It was the ability to look at another human being in their moment of despair and say, with absolute certainty, "I see you. You are not alone." Later, after everyone had gone, Daniel and I sat in the quiet, moonlit garden. The paintings were still hanging in the common room, silent witnesses to the evening's magic. "You did a brave thing tonight, Sophia," he said, taking my hand. His touch was warm and steady. "I feel light," I confessed. "For the first time, I feel like all the different parts of my life are finally at peace with each other." I thought back to the woman I was, shivering in an old sedan, convinced my life was over. I thought of Mark, a fading ghost from a different lifetime. I thought of Genevieve Du Bois, the mysterious architect of my second chance. She had left me her money, but her true inheritance was a lesson that a woman's worth is her own, that her provisions must be her own, and that her light, once rediscovered, can illuminate the path for others. Home, I realized, was not the brick house on Maple Avenue, nor my lovely, quiet apartment. Home was this feeling. It was the rich soil under my fingernails, the scent of oil paint in my studio, the sound of laughter in the halls of the Sophia house, the comfortable silence with a man who respected my scars, the love of my children, and the profound, unshakable knowledge that I had taken the greatest tragedy of my life and transformed it into a legacy of hope. My name is Sophia. I was once invisible. I was once lost. But a stranger asked my name, and in doing so, she reminded me that I had a story. And I have learned that a story shared is the most powerful currency in the world. It can build a home. It can heal a heart. And it can, in the end, save a life. It certainly saved mine.